Medical journals state that when a pistol barrel enters your peripheral vision, the human brain floods with cortisol, triggering a frantic fight-or-flight response that overrides all logic. Most people scream, some panic, but at 3:00 a.m. inside the Midnight Munch diner, Clemmie Vance defied biology. While customers dove under formica tables, Clemmie simply continued pouring black coffee into a ceramic mug. Her hand didn't shake, she didn't spill a drop. The neon sign outside buzzed against the relentless rain, casting a blood-red glow over her uniform. When the masked gunman shoved a 9mm in her face, screaming for the cash register, she didn't beg for her life. She merely critiqued his stance. And watching from the darkest corner booth was Eom Ji-Sung. He wore a suit worth more than the building and sat with the stillness of a predator. He wasn't looking at the gun. He was staring at the waitress, realizing that the most dangerous thing in the room wasn't the weapon, it was her. The scream that tore through the Midnight Munch wasn't from the waitress. It was from the young college student in booth 4, clutching her boyfriend as the front door slammed open. 3 men in wet ski masks stormed in, bringing the smell of ozone and desperation with them. The lead gunman vaulted over a wet floor sign, leveling a shaky Glock 19 at the counter. "Register now or I blow your head off." Clemmie Vance didn't reach for the cash drawer. She didn't even look at the weapon. She placed the coffee pot back on the burner with a deliberate, soft clink. Then she turned, crossing her arms over the red polyester of her uniform. She looked the gunman in the eye, or at least the panic-widened eyes visible through the wool mask. "Your stance is wrong," Clemmie said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the tremor that should have been there. "Feet parallel, shoulders tight. You're expecting recoil you can't control because you've never fired that gun before." The gunman froze, the aggression in the room stalled, hanging in the air like smoke. "What?" I said. "I heard you," Clemmie interrupted, her gaze dropping to his hands. "Your finger is resting on the trigger guard, not the trigger. That's range discipline. You're not a criminal, son. You're someone who took a safety course and got desperate." She leaned forward, invading his personal space despite the barrel inches from her forehead. "New sneakers, but they're wet. You walked here. No getaway car, which means you're not part of a crew. You're alone, you're broke, and you're about 30 seconds away from a felony charge that ruins your life." The silence that followed was heavy. The other 2 robbers shifted uncomfortably by the door, sensing the power dynamic shift. The leader's gun lowered an inch. "Go," Clemmie whispered, the command cutting through the diner's hum. "The silent alarm isn't triggered yet. Walk out and you're just a customer who forgot his wallet." The boy, he was just a boy, blinked. The bravado evaporated. He looked at his accomplices, then back at the calm, immovable woman in the red dress. He shoved the gun into his waistband and bolted. The bell jingled violently as they scrambled back into the rainy night. Clemmie exhaled, the only sign that her heart was beating at all. She picked up a rag and wiped a non-existent spot on the counter. "Check, please." The voice came from the corner booth. Eom Ji-Sung stood up. He hadn't moved during the entire ordeal. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal suit and walked to the counter, his movements fluid and precise. He didn't look like a man who had just witnessed a robbery. He looked like a critic who had just watched a performance. He pulled a money clip from his jacket, peeling off $500 bills. He placed them on the formica, covering the spot Clemmie had just wiped. "For the disturbance," Ji-Sung said. His accent was faint, polished by years of Ivy League education, but the coldness in his eyes was ancestral. He slid a black business card across the surface. It had no logo, just a number and a single sentence handwritten in silver ink. "You are wasted here." He didn't wait for a thank you. He turned and walked into the rain, leaving Clemmie staring at the card, the adrenaline finally beginning to cold-soak her veins. The black business card ended up in the trash bin outside her apartment complex, sandwiched between a coffee filter and yesterday's junk mail. Clemmie didn't do consulting, and she certainly didn't do favors for men who wore suits that cost more than her sister's bail. The $500 he'd left on the counter went straight into a hidden envelope taped under her sink, but the card was a bridge she refused to cross. She was invisible for a reason. Then the phone rang. It wasn't the soft chime of a friend. It was the harsh, jarring ring of the county detention center. The public defender sounded tired, his voice tinny through the receiver. "They denied the appeal, Ms. Vance. The judge labeled Myra flight risk. Unless we confront a specialized defense counsel by Monday, she's being transferred to maximum security." The line went dead, and with it the air in Clemmie's tiny kitchen. Maximum security wasn't a holding cell. For a 20-year-old girl with no street smarts, it was a death sentence. Clemmie looked at the envelope under the sink. It wasn't enough. It wouldn't even cover the filing fees. She was outside in the rain 3 minutes later, digging through the dumpster until her fingers brushed against the wet, heavy stock of the black card. The headquarters of the Kaesong Syndicate wasn't a smoky backroom. It was a monolith of glass and steel piercing the skyline of the financial district. The elevator ride to the penthouse was silent and suffocatingly fast. When the doors slid open, Clemmie didn't step into an office. She stepped into a panoramic view of the city she was trying to survive. Eom Ji-Sung stood by the window, his back to her, watching the traffic crawl below like bioluminescent insects. He didn't turn around when she entered. "I expected you sooner," he said, his reflection ghosting against the glass. "My sister needs a lawyer," Clemmie said, skipping the pleasantries. "A real one, the kind that plays golf with judges, that's the price." Ji-Sung finally turned. The room was cold, minimalist and terrifyingly precise, much like the man inhabiting it. He walked to his desk, a slab of obsidian, and poured 2 glasses of water. "Done. The firm of Sterling and Cho will represent her as of this morning. She will be out on house arrest by dinner." Clemmie felt the tension in her shoulders knot, then snap. The relief was dizzying, but she forced her face to remain a mask of stone. "You paid a retainer before I even said yes. That's arrogant." "That's preparation," he corrected. "I don't gamble, Ms. Vance." "So what am I here for?" Clemmie asked, ignoring the water. "You saw me talk down a junkie with a Glock. You want me to teach your men de-escalation, or do you want me to carry a piece?" Ji-Sung laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He pressed a button on his desk, and a wall of monitors flickered to life, showing live feeds of docks, boardrooms, and warehouses. "I have 300 soldiers who can shoot a target from a moving car," he said softly, walking toward her until he was just inside her personal space. "I can buy violence. Violence is cheap, but I am surrounded by liars. My captains, my partners, my rivals, they all smile, they all bow, and they all lie." He gestured to the screens, to the empire he was trying to hold together. "I watched you in the diner. You didn't just see a gun, you saw the tremor in the boy's hand. You saw the wet shoes, you read the story he wasn't telling." Ji-Sung's dark eyes locked onto hers, stripping away the waitress persona she had worn for years. "I don't want a shooter, Clemmie. I need a human lie detector. I need you to walk into rooms with me and tell me who is holding a knife behind their back." Before we continuing this thrilling story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Where are you watching from? Like, comment and share. The conference room on the 45th floor was soundproofed, temperature-controlled, and currently suffocating under the weight of a multi-million-dollar stalemate. Eom Ji-Sung sat at the head of the mahogany table, his face a mask of polite indifference. Across from him sat Chairman Han, a shipping magnate with a face like tanned leather and a voice that boomed with fabricated outrage. "The port fees have doubled, Ji-Sung," Han spat, slamming a thick folder onto the table. "You think I can absorb that? My ships don't move for charity. You want the northern route. The price is up 20%. Take it or I sell the space to the triads. They've been calling me all week." The threat hung in the air, heavy and jagged. Ji-Sung's lieutenants, lined up against the back wall, shifted their weight. They knew the northern route was the syndicate's lifeline. Losing it meant bleeding millions. They looked ready to draw weapons, their hands twitching near their holsters. But Ji-Sung didn't look at his men. He looked at the woman sitting quietly in the corner chair, blending into the shadows in a sharp, slate-grey blazer. Clemmie Vance hadn't said a word since the meeting began. She had simply watched, her eyes tracking the rhythm of Han's breathing, the twitch of his fingers, the cadence of his bluster. "Well," Han demanded, leaning forward, "do we have a deal or do I make a call?" "He doesn't have the triads," Clemmie said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped the room cold. Han whipped his head around, his eyes narrowing. "Who is the secretary?" "I'm the person who knows you're bluffing," Clemmie said, standing up. She walked to the table, her heels clicking a slow, predatory tempo on the marble floor. She didn't look at Ji-Sung for permission, she just took the floor. "3 tells, Chairman. First, the soothing gesture. Every time you mentioned the triads, your hand went to your tie knot. You're protecting your neck. It's a subconscious defense mechanism when a primate feels vulnerable. If you had a strong alternative offer, you'd be leaning back, exposing your chest, maximizing your space. Instead, you're making yourself small." Han's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "This is prepose." Second, Clemmie cut him off, her tone surgical. Your blink rate, it tripled when you gave the 20% figure. Cognitive load increase. You were doing math in your head, calculating the exact number you need to cover a debt, not the market value of the shipping lane. She stopped directly behind Han's chair, leaning down so her voice was a whisper near his ear. And third, the folder. She tapped the thick leather binder he had slammed down. You slammed it to intimidate, but you never opened it. Not once, because there are no new fee schedules in there, are there? It's probably empty, or filled with blank paper. Han's hand twitched toward the folder, then stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a man whose throat had been cut without a blade being drawn. Clemmie looked at Ji-Sung. He's leveraged. He owes money to someone dangerous and he's trying to gouge you to pay them off. Offer him the original rate minus 10% for the insult. He'll take it. Han slumped in his chair, the air hissing out of him like a punctured tire. He didn't argue. He didn't scream. He just nodded, defeated by a woman who had dissected his soul in under 2 minutes. As the meeting dispersed and a broken chairman Han was escorted out, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Ji-Sung S lieutenants didn't look at Clemmie with the usual dismissal reserved for outsiders. They looked at her with wide, unsettled eyes, stepping out of her path as if she were a loaded weapon that could go off at any moment. Ji-Sung remained seated, a faint, terrifying smile touching his lips. He had wanted a ghost. He had gotten a witch. 3 days after the boardroom dissection, the air around Ji-Sung felt heavier. They were exiting a jazz club in the Velvetrope district, a necessary public appearance to quell rumours of internal strife. The rain had turned the pavement into a black mirror, reflecting the blood-red taillights of the idling convoy. Ji-Sung moved with his usual fluid grace, one hand buttoning his jacket, the other checking his watch. Clemmie walked a step behind and to the left, her eyes scanning the periphery not for fans, but for friction. The crack of the rifle didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like a whip snapping against wet concrete. Glass exploded. The rear window of the armoured sedan shattered into 1,000 diamonds. Down, get him down! The head of security roared, shoving Ji-Sung behind the engine block. Panic erupted on the sidewalk. Pedestrians screamed, scattering like pigeons. Clemmie didn't drop. She crouched using the door frame for cover, but her eyes didn't squeeze shut. She looked up. Across the street, 4 stories up on a fire escape, a shadow detached itself from the brickwork. A figure in dark tactical gear. He had the high ground. He had the angle. Ji-Sung S head was exposed for a fleeting second before the bodyguards covered him. A clean kill shot. But the shooter didn't take it. Instead, the figure raised the rifle barrel a fraction of an inch and fired again. Ping! The bullet sparked harmlessly off the pavement 3 feet to the left of the cluster of men. Cover fire, a bodyguard screamed, emptying his clip blindly at the rooftops. The shooter didn't return fire. He didn't panic. He simply melted back into the shadows, disappearing with the practiced ease of a ghost. Later in the safe house, while the security team raged about perimeter breaches and moles, Clemmie stood by the window, replaying the tape in her mind. He missed, the security chief growled, packing the room. We got lucky. No, Clemmie said, her voice cutting through the testosterone like a scalpel. She turned to Ji-Sung, who was picking glass shards out of his hair. He didn't miss, he had you. The wind was negligible. The range was less than 80 yards. A novice could have made that shot. Ji-Sung looked up, his expression unreadable. Then why am I alive? Because he hesitated, Clemmie said, her mind racing, connecting dots that shouldn't have been there. He waited until the security detail was moving into formation. He waited until the sightline was cluttered. And that second shot, he aimed at the ground. He wasn't trying to kill you, Ji-Sung. She walked to the table where the security schematics were spread out. He was trying to scare you. This wasn't an assassination, it was theatre. She looked at the time on the wall clock. And it happened exactly 7 minutes after the nightly news cycle began. The cameras were already down the block covering the gala. They got the footage of you on your knees, looking weak within seconds. Clemmie felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't an enemy attack, it was a press release. The safe house kitchen was silent, save for the rhythmic chop-chop-chop of a knife against a bamboo board. Eom Ji-Sung had discarded his ruined suit jacket, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension. He wasn't looking at security feeds or tactical maps. He was slicing scallions. You cook, Clemmie observed, leaning against the marble island, nursing a glass of cheap bourbon she'd found in the cupboard. It is chemistry, Ji-Sung replied, sliding the vegetables into a steaming pot of ramyeon. Predictable, controlled, unlike my life. He brought 2 bowls to the counter, the steam curling between them like a barrier being slowly dismantled. My father built an empire on fear, my mother maintains it with tradition. They look at me and see a king, I look in the mirror and see a target. He pushed a bowl toward her. It was a simple gesture, domestic and disarming. Clemmie took a pair of chopsticks, the warmth of the broth seeping into her cold fingers. We're not so different, Ji-Sung. You inherited a throne you didn't ask for. I inherited a conscience I can't afford. You could have run, he said softly, watching her eat. After the diner, after the bail hearing, why stay? Because running is just dying slowly, Clemmie admitted, her gaze dropping to the dark liquid in her bowl. I spent 10 years talking people off ledges. I told them life was worth it. Then I made a mistake and a girl died because I miscalculated a breath, a pause, a word. Now my sister is paying for my need to save everyone. She looked up, her eyes locking with his. I don't want to save you, Ji-Sung. I just want to make sure the math works out this time. The air in the kitchen shifted. It grew thin, charged with something that wasn't fear and wasn't business. Ji-Sung reached across the island. He didn't touch her, but his hand hovered near hers, a question asked without words. For the first time, the ghost and the king weren't plotting a war. They were just 2 drowning people recognizing the same water in each other's lungs. Clemmie, he whispered, his voice dropping an octave, stripping away the command, leaving only the man. The vibration of the phone on the countertop sounded like a gunshot. Ji-Sung didn't flinch, but the moment shattered instantly. He picked up the device, his eyes hardening back into obsidian as he read the screen. He didn't speak. He simply turned the phone around and slid it across the marble toward her. The screen displayed a single notification from the Syndicate's offshore banking alert system. Balance $0. The operating accounts, Ji-Sung said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Payroll, bribes, the port fees, it's all gone. Clemmie stared at the zeros. This wasn't a robbery. This was an eviction. Who has the clearance? She asked, her mind already racing, calculating, profiling. Only 2 people, Ji-Sung replied, looking at the dark window where the rain continued to fall. Me, and the person who gave me the codes. The glow of the laptop screen turned Clemmie's face into a mask of blue light and sharp angles. The kitchen, moments ago warm with the smell of broth and shared secrets, now felt like a crypt. Eom Ji-Sung paced behind her, the sound of his Italian leather shoes on the hardwood echoing the erratic rhythm of his heart. They bypassed the biometric firewall, Ji-Sung muttered, running a hand through his hair. It's the Russians, it has to be. They've been probing the network for weeks. No, Clemmie said, her voice devoid of emotion. She wasn't guessing, she was dissecting. Russians leave footprints. They smash windows to show you they can get in. This is a ghost walking through a wall. She typed a command, bringing up the transaction logs. The numbers were staggering, millions of dollars, the lifeblood of the syndicate, drained in seconds. But it wasn't the amount that made Clemmie's stomach turn, it was the method. Look at the routing numbers, she said, pointing to the string of digits cascading down the screen. They didn't wash the money through crypto, they didn't bounce it through the dark web, they sent it through legitimate channels. Singapore, the Caymans, Zurich. It's a laundering loop, Ji-Sung argued, leaning over her shoulder. Standard protocol for theft. It's not theft, Ji-Sung, it's a transfer. Clemmie stopped typing. She spun the laptop around so he could see the final destination. The complex web of shell companies all collapsed into a single, dormant entity. The Mugunghwa Preservation Trust. Ji-Sung froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking more like a statue than a man. He knew that name. It wasn't a criminal front. It was the holding company for his family's ancestral estates. That account has been inactive for 20 years, he whispered. It requires dual authentication, my father's key and mine. Or someone who has access to the physical backups, Clemmie said softly. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, the hesitation of the shooter on the roof, the vanished security detail, the sudden financial evisceration. None of it was an attack, it was a grounding. Someone isn't trying to destroy the syndicate, Clemmie said, standing up to face him. They're trying to ground you. They're cutting your allowance, stripping your protection, and isolating you. She walked to the window, looking out at the city that wanted them dead. But the danger wasn't out there in the neon-soaked streets. The shooter missed on purpose to make you look weak. The money was moved to make you dependent. This isn't a war, Ji-Sung, it's a parenting strategy. She turned back to him, her eyes wide with the horror of the truth. The call isn't coming from the triads, it's coming from inside the house. The name on the screen didn't change, no matter how hard Eom Ji-Sung stared at it. Madame Choi, his mother, the matriarch. It's a mistake, Ji-Sung said, his voice brittle. A glitch, someone spoofed her encryption key. It's biometric, Ji-Sung, Clemmie said, her voice steady but laced with a pity she knew he would hate. Retinal scan required. She authorized the transfer 30 minutes ago. She didn't steal the money, she moved it to a safe deposit box you can't touch. Ji-Sung turned away from the laptop, walking to the window where the rain lashed against the glass. You don't understand this family. My mother built the Kaesong Syndicate from the ashes of the war. She would burn this city to the ground before she betrayed me. She is burning it, Clemmie countered, stepping into his line of sight. The shooter who missed, that was a warning, the frozen assets, that's a leash. She thinks you're weak, Ji-Sung. She thinks your Western education and your desire for legitimacy are destroying the legacy. This isn't a betrayal to her, it's a correction. Ji-Sung spun around, his face twisted in a fury Clemmie had never seen. It wasn't the anger of a mob boss, it was the defensive rage of a son. Stop. She's staging a coup, and she's using your loyalty as a weapon against you. I said stop, Ji-Sung roared, slamming his hand against the marble island. The sound cracked through the penthouse. You are an outsider. You come here with your psychology degrees and your profiling, thinking you can dissect 50 years of blood bonds. You know nothing. He advanced on her, the vulnerability from dinner replaced by walls of ice. Maybe this is your game, Clemmie. Isolate the king. Make him doubt his generals, his family, until the only person he trusts is the consultant. I am trying to save your life, Clemmie said, holding her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. You are fired, Ji-Sung spat. The words were final. Get out, take your money, save your sister. But if I see you near my family again, I will not be as polite as the boy in the diner. Clemmie didn't argue, she didn't plead. She saw the micro-expression of pain behind his eyes, the cognitive dissonance tearing him apart, but she knew she couldn't fix it. Not tonight. She grabbed her coat and walked to the elevator. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of Eom Ji-Sung standing alone in his tower of glass. The lobby was empty. Clemmie pushed through the revolving doors and into the storm. The cold rain soaked her instantly, washing away the warmth of the penthouse. She reached for her phone to call a cab to get to the airport to run. A black sedan pulled up to the curb, moving with the silence of a shark. The rear door slid open. Inside sat two men. They weren't wearing the tactical gear of street soldiers. They wore traditional silk suits, the crest of the white tiger embroidered on the collars, the matriarch's personal honor guard. Clemmie froze. She calculated the distance to the subway entrance. Too far. Ms. Vance, the man nearest the door, said. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply gestured to the empty seat. Madame Choi has prepared tea. It would be rude to keep her waiting. Clemmie looked back up at the penthouse, a single light burning in the darkness. She realized then that she hadn't been fired. She had been separated from the herd. She stepped into the car. The heavy oak doors to the ancestral hall didn't creak. They swung open with the silent weight of history. Eom Ji-Sung stepped inside, his pistol drawn, expecting an ambush. What he found was a ceremony. The room smelled of white jasmine and ozone. At the far end, seated on a raised dais adorned with the Kaesong crest, was Madame Choi. She wore a traditional hanbok of mourning white, her face a mask of porcelain indifference. In the center of the room, kneeling on the tatami mats with her hands bound behind her back, was Clemmie. She wasn't bruised, she wasn't crying. She was watching the matriarch with the same clinical detachment she had shown the gunman in the diner. Put the weapon away, my son, Madame Choi said, her voice soft but echoing off the lacquer walls. We are not thugs. Lined against the walls were the honor guard, 12 men who had served the family since Ji-Sung was a child. They stood like statues, their loyalty absolute, or so it seemed. Ji-Sung kept his gun raised. Let her go. She is the rot, Choi said, gesturing gracefully to Clemmie. She is the Western poison in your ear, whispering that our traditions are weaknesses. You cannot lead this family while she holds your leash. She placed a ceremonial dagger on the low table before her. Cut the tie. Prove that you are my son and not just her puppet. Kill her and the accounts will be unlocked. The rebellion ends. Ji-Sung looked at the knife, then at Clemmie. His hand trembled just once. "She's vibrating," Clemmie said. The words cut through the ritual silence. Clemmie didn't look at Ji-Sung. She looked past him directly at the stony face of Commander Park, the head of the honor guard. "Silence," Park barked, his hand drifting to his sword. "Look at her teacup, Commander," Clemmie continued, her voice gaining strength. "The matriarch is trembling. It's a micro-tremor in the left hand. Fear response. She's not afraid of her son, she's afraid of you." Madame Choi's eyes widened by a fraction of a millimeter. "Gag her." "Why did she move the money to the Mugunghwa Trust?" Clemmie asked, speaking faster now, racing against the blade. "It wasn't to teach Ji-Sung a lesson, it was an exit strategy. I saw the ledger, Commander. She didn't just freeze the operating accounts. She liquidated the pension fund, the widow's fund, the blood money meant for your families when you die in her service." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Commander Park froze. The honor guard, men who would catch bullets for the family, shifted their weight. "Lies," Madame Choi hissed, standing up, the teacup rattling in its saucer. "She is a manipulator, a witch." "Check the routing number," Clemmie challenged, locking eyes with the commander. "Cayman account 404, it's not in the family trust anymore. It's in a private holding under her maiden name. She's not saving the Empire, Park. She's cashing it out and leaving you to rot." Commander Park looked at the matriarch. He looked at the trembling teacup. Then, slowly, he pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen 3 times. The silence that stretched was agonizing. When Park looked up, his face was pale. He didn't draw his sword. He simply took 1 step back away from the dais. Then the man next to him did the same. Then the next. One by one, the honor guard stepped back into the shadows, leaving the matriarch alone in the light. Madame Choi stood trembling on her throne, stripped of the only armor that mattered, their belief in her. She slumped back onto the cushion, not a queen, but an old woman caught stealing from her own children. Ji-Sung holstered his gun. He walked past his mother without looking at her, knelt, and used the ceremonial dagger to cut the ropes binding Clemmie Wright's wrists. "You're right," Ji-Sung whispered to her, helping her stand. "Violence is cheap, the truth is expensive." The departure of Madame Choi wasn't violent. It was quiet, absolute, and utterly humiliating. Stripped of her influence and her guards, she was escorted to a private airfield and put on a plane to a monastery in the mountains of Gangwon, her accounts frozen, her name whispered only as a cautionary tale. In the penthouse office, the air felt different, lighter. Eom Ji-Sung stood by the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, but the weight on his shoulders seemed to have evaporated. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a simple black turtleneck, relaxed, human. Clemmie packed her briefcase. The contract was done. Her sister was safe, living in a dorm room paid for by an anonymous donor, studying pre-law. The debt was settled. She was free to go back to being invisible. "You're leaving," Ji-Sung said. "It wasn't a question." "Job's done," Clemmie replied, snapping the clasps shut. "You have your empire back. You don't need a lie detector when you're the only one telling the truth." Ji-Sung turned. He walked to his desk and picked up a single file, the deed to the Kaesong Syndicate's legitimate holdings. He held it out to her. "I don't need an employee, Clemmie, I need a partner." He placed the file on the obsidian desk. "Someone who can see the knife before it's drawn. Someone who isn't afraid to tell the king he's naked. Stay, not for the money, for the game." Clemmie looked at the file, then at him. The old Clemmie, the one who wiped tables and hid in the shadows, would have run. But that woman had died the moment she spoke up in the ancestral hall. "Partner," she tested the word. It tasted dangerous, it tasted right. "Under one condition," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "We make a stop first." The Midnight Munch looked exactly as it had the night the gunman walked in, tired, wet, and smelling of old grease. The owner, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, was behind the counter, scrubbing a stain that had been there since the 80s. When the bell jingled, he looked up, expecting trouble. He froze when he saw Clemmie. She wasn't wearing red polyester. She was wearing a tailored cream trench coat that screamed power. Behind her stood the man in the charcoal suit. "Clemmie," Henderson stammered. I thought you found something else." "I did," Clemmie said, walking to the counter. She didn't pick up a pot. She placed a document on the damp formica. "But I realized I left something behind." Henderson squinted at the paper. It was a deed transfer. "What is this?" "The building," Ji-Sung said, stepping up beside her. And the lot next door, and the mortgage on your house, it's all paid for. Henderson looked from the paper to Clemmie, his eyes wide with shock. Why? Because you gave me a job when I was nobody, Clemmie said softly, and because the coffee is terrible but the pie is excellent. They walked out into the rain, but this time it didn't feel cold. It felt like a baptism. Clemmie Vance had spent her life running from the things that made her dangerous, her mind, her voice, her ability to see the strings on the puppets. But as she stood next to Eom Ji-Sung, watching the city breathe, she realized the truth. True power isn't about who holds the weapon, it's about who controls the situation. Running from your past only hides your potential. You must embrace who you are to protect what you love. And Clemmie Vance was done running. She was ready to rule. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share this video and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Where in the world are you turning in from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts. I appreciate the time you spent here with me today.